Okay, colleagues, shall we make yet another start? Welcome back to some of you for the second afternoon session on this subject of, to me, great fascination, successful freelancing. I'm the chair of this session, Martin Ince, and we've got three speakers to get things going. And we'll start, if that's okay, with you, I think, with Priya Shetty, who's a freelance science journalist, and you write rather widely from my observation of your website, with a special focus on health and on human rights in the developing world, in the global south. And you're going to speak about your approach to freelancing and on an international scale, and you're going to show this presentation.
Yes. Hi,
Thank
everyone. So I've been freelancing on and off for about 8 years now, and it's gotten easier. It feels very different as time has gone on. I used to be a staff editor at the Lancet and staff editor at New Scientist, and then I've been freelance for all of those places, and then places like the BBC and the Guardian and the World Health Organization, and they're all very different clients. So what I thought I'd just talk about are the 5 top things I really wish I'd known when I started out. I may not have listened, but I kind of wish I'd known about it. The first one is to seek out interesting ideas and people. And I think when people start freelancing, they get really obsessed with networking and getting loads of business cards from people and schmoozing, and people can feel that if they're not the greatest networker, that they may not be cut out for freelancing. You know, it can feel very uncomfortable to just sort of sidle up to someone at a conference and just talk to them because of who they are. So I think if you look for ideas and you look for interesting people and you look to connect on that level from the point of view of what you find interesting, and hopefully they'll find interesting too, and then that can lead to all kinds of interesting collaborations. You may end up working in types of media you didn't think you would. You may end up working on projects or for clients you didn't think you would. But I think the idea has to be the starting point, really. The second one can be a bit of an uncomfortable thing, this idea of being a business or a brand. If you're a science journalist, it feels quite corporate. It can feel quite PR-y, and it may not come instinctively to a science journalist. But what thinking of yourself in business terms does is it takes away some of the messy sort of emotional or intellectual complexity out of it, and it also reminds you that you need to make a living out of this. No one is paying you a salary every month. No one is managing your pension. No one is managing your healthcare benefits, or if those things even exist if you're a permanent employee anymore. And so you need to do it. And if you get very caught up with the idea of science as this very pure endeavour that you're supposed to be doing because you love it, I mean, absolutely, you shouldn't be a science journalist if you don't love science. But thinking of yourself as a business then makes it easier to think of what you write as a product. And I mean that in the terms of something that has value. I don't just mean something that you're going to push at everyone regardless of whether they want it or not. I just mean that it should be something you've put a lot of effort and investment into it, so you need something back. And so you can work for NGOs or for charities. I mean, I work in global health, so there are a lot of NGOs that I work with who don't necessarily have big budgets. But I'm aware that in the same way that a business has certain projects that they really believe in, but they have other sort of, for want of a better term, kind of money spinners on the side, you need a mix of those two things, otherwise you're going to be broke very quickly. And this kind of connects with being a business, which is negotiation. And again, I don't know whether it's to do with being in science or being a journalist, but people do find money conversations very hard. They find negotiation very hard. If you're starting out as a freelancer, you can be really tempted in this day and age of free blogs and staff budgets being really cut and freelancer rates not rising. You can be very tempted to do it for free or for very little. And that's fine if you're just starting out, and getting a great byline somewhere like the BBC or the Guardian or wherever does a lot for your CV, and it does have value of its own that isn't monetary. But you can't keep undercutting yourself because again, you'll be out of business very soon. And you kind of just have to get over the idea that money is too gauche to talk about, or, it's too uncomfortable. I mean, you do have to do some very hard, you are your HR department, your finance department, your legal department. You don't have recourse to any of these things because you're not in an institution. So one invoice, for example, for quite a significant amount of money for a very big client was quite late. It was nearly about 6 or 7 months late, which is very rare. It almost never happens. And I had to get very, very involved. And I rang up their finance department every day for about 2 weeks, until I think the finance person nearly had a stroke, because they just couldn't bear to keep hearing my voice every day. But it worked, and they did pay me. And you need to be prepared. You don't need to be obnoxious. You don't need to be rude. But you do need to be prepared to be tough, to know that that is money owed to you, that you have certain, to find out what your options are if they just don't pay, or they pay you less than they're supposed to, or whatever. And I think if you don't want to talk about money, or you don't want to negotiate, then freelance may not be for you either. This, I think, I almost wish I'd put it as my first point, really, trusting your gut and your instincts. As a freelancer, when things go badly, you're almost always a person who suffers, because you end up working way longer on something than you expected. You might have to rework something completely, and you may not get compensated. And it's hard to sort of explain, because sometimes you're approached by a client who is very well respected, by a journalist who's really senior, and it might be hard for you to pinpoint what that kind of bad gut feeling is, but it's always worth listening to. If you're starting out as a freelancer, it can be hard to develop that instinct, because that is effectively kind of a business skill, and it just comes from experience of being a journalist. You know after a while which projects are going to end badly. But some of the warning signals, for example, are if the brief or the commission is really unclear, the person commissioning you doesn't exactly seem to know what they want, and they want to just sort of feel their way through it. When the amount of work they're expecting seems way too unrealistic for the time they're allowing or the money they're offering, or when they don't have very definite deadlines, all of those things will come to bite you as a freelancer rather than them, because once you've agreed to a project and you've signed, often if it's even if it's a very short news story, you do have a contract with a publication. A kind of a freelance waiver or something that they get you to sign. If you do bigger projects, such as 2 to 3 month things, you do have a set of deliverables that you agree to. And once you've agreed to it, and once you've signed, there's really no getting out of it. And it can be very tempting to never say no to things, which is my final point, which is that autonomy as a freelancer is very, very, very important. And it can be really tempting to, especially when you're starting out. And I guess if you are thinking of yourself as a business, as I sort of mentioned earlier, you do need to put a lot of hard work. You do need to put your heart and soul into building your business. So that might mean working weekends, working evenings, working over public holidays and so on. But that has to be, to some extent, on your own terms. You don't have to have someone email you something on Good Friday and expect it by Easter Monday. People should, a lot of people actually expect freelancers never want to take public holidays. They never want to, they're always happy to work over the weekend. The ability to say no is, and that autonomy, it is a negotiating power. It's a skill that you may not feel you have at the beginning, and maybe as you get more, more senior and more experienced, you can exercise that power a bit more. But as a freelancer, you actually have very few benefits in terms of there's no security, there's no financial security, there's no security in many senses. And so the only power you do have is who you work with, what kind of work you do, and when you work. And if it's really unacceptable for you to work over Christmas, let's say, then you don't, again, it's about, being respectful with your clients and your editors and saying, look, I can't, just the Christmas just gone, I was emailed something on Christmas Eve, and they were expecting it within about 2 days. And I thought, that's quite an assumption to make, that I don't want to take Christmas Day or Boxing Day with my family, and I don't know whether they made a cultural assumption. I really don't know. And I didn't have a choice, because that editor then went on holiday. And so, and it was something I had to do. I mean, sometimes as a journalist, as you probably know, you just have to work weird times and weird deadlines. But you do have the right to say, I like a bit of time off now and then. I'm going on holiday. I won't be contactable. And you'll find that if you start to exercise that autonomy, because everyone impinges on it, if you're a freelancer, they want to pay you as little as possible, to pay you the same rate for about 10 years. They want to pay you the same if you've been in the industry for 20 years as someone who's just starting out. They don't care that you're working on a Saturday or Sunday. They want to pay you the same rate. And you are the only one who can define those terms, which again comes back to thinking of yourself as a small business, that you have terms and conditions as much as your client does. And it does take guts, and it does take faith in yourself, because you sometimes think you might be making a bit of a gamble. It doesn't always pay off. You might try and negotiate for more money, and they might just keep coming back to you saying, I'm really sorry, this is all we have. But don't be put off by that. If you ask for more money, the worst thing they can say is no. You're not going to be struck off some freelancer list because you had the gall to ask for money, or because you had the gall to not want to work Saturdays and Sundays, or work on a project you're not interested in. So you can decline many things, just be respectful and hold your ground.
Thank you. Oh, that's all this. Right, thank you very much. And the second is Speaker's Richard Vize, who trades as Public Policy Media Ltd. For those of you who were in the last session and heard the discussion about having a company or not having a company. Former editor of the Health Service Journal, and obviously a pretty quiet job, head of communications at Ofsted. Now, Richard writes for a wide range of publications, but also advises a wide range of bodies in the health policy arena, mainly, is it fair to say? And I think perhaps if you were able to tell us a little about both of those aspects, we'd be fascinated. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Martin. I've been freelancing since 2011, after I left Ofsted, mainly writing for Guardian, British Medical Journal, Health Service Journal, and quite a wide range of NHS-related organisations, a mixture of journalism, policy development, and some communications work as well. I do very much agree with Priya about the setting up a company. It feels less desperate, actually. You're not scrabbling around for work, you're working for your own company, and it gives you an identity and a focus, and a sort of professional sort of badge of convenience. It also just makes you think about, how do I develop this business? Which directions do I wish to take it in? Do I wish to continue with pure journalism? Do I wish to diversify? How do I wish to approach this? And there are financial management benefits as well, which you may well have heard in the previous session. In terms of bringing work in, I was starting with very much a clean slate. I been sort of talking to the Guardian a few months before I left Ofsted, and it took me 7 months to land a column with them. My net income from my gross income, in fact, from the first 2 months was 300 quid. So it was sort of from a fairly modest start. I was doing, I guess, what you'd call sort of subliminal work hunting. So working at the relationships and the work coming through the relationships. I was just networking relentlessly, and still do. I'm utterly shameless about inviting myself to dinners, breakfasts, letter openings, anything where I think I can build relationships and build my knowledge. One thing I certainly noticed as a freelance, having worked in a reasonably sizable team before, is how difficult it is to keep on top of everything and to keep current, very much relying on social media and so forth, and RSS feeds and all the rest of it to keep on top of it. So you've really got to be out there and having conversations, not just to get the work, but to ensure that your knowledge and insights are still current. One thing that I'm very, very glad I did was focus on having multiple relationships at all my major employers. With the staff turnover that it is now, people go at a terrifying rate. People who were long in post can disappear overnight. And so I very much focus on ensuring I have at least 3 or 4 relationships around the immediate contact. I support people like the sales staff, so at The Guardian, for example. I brief them on the NHS health reforms, which they did actually pay me for, to be fair. I go and visit them on the stand at conferences and so forth, and I enjoy developing those relationships and valuing them and helping them see me as part of a team rather than just as someone who writes some particular pieces of work for them occasionally. Social media I have found useful up to a point. It's certainly no nirvana in terms of getting your name out there, but it does at least give your identity. I have actually found LinkedIn quite useful. It's good for telling all your contacts what you are now doing, and indeed flagging up specific pieces of work. The thing I like least about freelance after negotiating on money is the "what are you doing now" conversation. And LinkedIn is a way of propagating information about your new sort of freelance independent status. And social media indeed has been useful for picking up the odd bit of work as well. I found it quite a good sort of neutral space to open up old contacts of people I know a little bit but not particularly well. And again, sort of having a conversation with them, circling around information and ideas rather than focusing on specific work. One thing I found very much in the first few months was that promises of work and interesting ideas are honoured in the breach in the early days, certainly more than in the actuality. So there's quite a lot of expectation management about what's going to be landed and what isn't, and you know pretty soon actually who's going to be reliable on that front and who less so. The negotiating rates thing I do find tough, and actually you can make your own noose for that by, particularly with quite a big project and one that's sort of growing and adapting as you go over a period of months. If you're not specifying stuff early on, then actually you can find yourself in a position where actually we're not quite sure where the agreed amount of money is in this. And I've actually adopted a particular form of words in terms of speaking and in terms of emails of inviting approval for a particular invoicing for a particular amount without actually locking myself into a conflict about a particular fee. And so far, so good. To be honest, I've never been particularly unhappy with what's happened. Also, do occasionally keep your mouth shut when you're talking about money. More than once, they've offered me more than I was going to ask for. A couple of times by quite a substantial amount. So do bear that in mind. If hard-nosed negotiating is not your forte, just have a think about the wallet of the person sitting opposite you, and they might be more generous than you might expect. I do have differential rates. So if I'm doing a piece of consultancy work as opposed to more pure journalism, I very much charge a different rate and will stick to that. There has been a couple of occasions where I've turned down work on that basis. That I won't sort of go for a lower rate when I think that they're tapping into expertise I've spent a fair amount of time building up. So, Priya was saying, if you don't value your expertise and knowledge, nobody else will. So you do have to draw some lines with that, even if it might mean losing out in the short term. There's some interesting issues about whether or not freelance actually means that you've gone absent without leave from the career ladder. I think probably you have, not because you couldn't get a career. On the contrary, I think CVs tend to broaden and deepen as you do freelance work, as you pursue new projects and new ideas. The difficulty is that on a personal level, you become virtually unemployable because you're so used to the flexibility and the creativity, really, of growing your own business and doing your own thing, that it would be quite difficult to be locked back into a situation again whereby you were working for one employer, where you had a very limited and specified range of tasks, and you were negotiating over stuff such as holidays. Diversity is one of the key joys, I think, of being a freelance. So the things I wanted to do included working for specific publications, which I've managed to do. I wanted to do some work in the third sector, so I'm a trustee of the whistleblowing charity Public Concern at Work, which obviously relates to my interests in the National Health Service. I wanted to do some teaching, and I'm very pleased to be doing some teaching at City on the Science Journalism MA there. And that's a fantastic opportunity, a real joy actually, which you wouldn't get if you're working for a company. And so I would encourage you to really pursue not just the financial benefits of being a freelance, but also the personal fulfillment side of it, and diversifying your interests. One of the difficulties of being a freelance is frankly when either work's quiet or when things go wrong, because you kind of feel very keenly that your relationship is only as good as your last column. There was something I did recently enough for it still to be seared onto my memory, and it was just a piece of work that wasn't happening. It was a bit like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. The more I tried to correct it, the more wonky it got. And you just have to try not to sweat too much on that. And obviously I made sure that the subsequent piece, was a much more successful. But within reasonable bounds, you have to sort of manage your own psychology of the highs and lows. Hopefully you'll get good feedback from your clients. Social media, when you get a good reaction on Twitter, that can be very rewarding actually, when you see you've actually kicked off a debate and respected people whose good opinion you respect are getting involved and approving of your work. Overall, I think it's been a fantastic decision for me. There are times when I have doubts. I do miss working in a team and being a part of sort of building and leading a team. And at some point I might have to consider that. But overall, it's been one of the best things I've done in my career, and I could thoroughly recommend it. Thanks, Martin.
Oh, thank you. And finally, Angela, you're working mainly in radio, I think you should say. Is that roughly right?
I'm writing more at the moment. But
and you're the author of a best-selling book in India, Geek Nation, which explains how Indian science is taking over the world, and an Independent Book of the Year, and also for a wide range of, as I said, print media and film, as well as Radio 4 and the World Service. Please.
So my route into freelancing was, into science journalism in particular, is quite different from a lot of people. I actually started my career as an ITN trainee in TV news, and then I went to the BBC to become a news reporter, not in science, just in news, general news. And that was the route everybody expected me to travel in, which is just stay in TV news, become a reporter, an editor, or a producer one day. And I just didn't find it fulfilling, intellectually fulfilling, because it's TV news, but also I missed science, and I really wanted to go back to science. My degree was in engineering. I wanted to go back to that world, and there just wasn't a job out there for a science reporter or a science correspondent at the level that I was at. I was 5 years into my career by then, so I didn't want to go backwards. And that's why I decided to go freelance. Priya and Richard have spoken really well on the business of being a freelancer, so I won't cover that ground again, but I'll just explain to you what it was like for me at the beginning, so how I entered freelancing, how I made it work at the start, because I imagine a lot of you are perhaps thinking about going freelance, or perhaps you have a day job and you want to freelance on the side, say. So for me, what I did is in my last year at the BBC, at the point I decided I'd be leaving, I built up lots of contacts. I contacted magazines and journals that I wanted to write for. I built up contacts within the BBC science unit, so I knew I could work for them when I left. This is the toughest part of freelancing. When you already work for someone, then it's very easy to keep doing work for them when you leave. But if you're going into new territory, which for me, science journalism was new territory, nobody had seen me do that before, they don't trust you at the beginning, so it's very difficult to get commissions. Now, I think there's one simple route to getting to the point you want to get to. It's slow, but it does work, which is pick a specialism. Mine happened to be engineering, so I tend to do engineering stories, and start writing for small niche publications within that specialism. It's very easy to do that because the wonderful thing about science journalism is we each do have a specialism, and there are very few people within that. So journals are always on the lookout for writers, for good writers within those niches. Once you have a bank of clippings from those niche publications, then you have something to show editors at mainstream publications. So that's when you can go to New Scientist or The Times or The Guardian or whichever bigger outlet you want to work for, and they will be more likely to trust you because then they can see what your work looks like. Getting your first commission from them will still take time. You will have to keep pitching. Have a thick skin. Don't worry if they knock you back. Just keep sending ideas. They're not going to get annoyed if you keep sending more ideas. They're in need of more ideas. And eventually you'll get your first piece commission. That, once you've broken that barrier, written your first piece for the publication you want to write for, then you're home and dry. Then you can keep writing forever for them. And what you want to do is have a portfolio of publications that you work for, like that, so that if you lose one of them, if the editor leaves, say, at New Scientist that you had a relationship with and nobody else wants to work with you, you're okay because you've got other publications you can work for. And even now, 6 years in, I'm still adding to my portfolio, and I have thrown publications out of my portfolio for various reasons. Say they didn't pay enough, or I didn't like the working relationship, for whatever reason. That way you're always fine. You've always got work coming in. For me, because I had a background in TV and radio, I also work in TV and radio. So I do packages for the radio science unit. One of the first things I did when I went freelance was do a TV documentary. And radio, I have to say, pay-wise isn't probably the worst pay-wise, but the best in terms of raising your profile. So when I do a Radio 4 documentary, a lot more people know who I am, and that helps me get more work, but I don't do them very often because they don't pay very much. Writing, I think, pays the most, especially the journals. The American journals in particular pay a huge amount, so that is my bread and butter. TV pays a huge amount, so you can make a huge amount of money in a very short space of time, but you have to get commissioned, and that commissioning process is very hit and miss. You can spend a year on a proposal, it goes through lots and lots of rounds of commissioning, and then at the end the editor says no. So that's something you kind of have to have on the back burner. You can't make that your main source of income in the background all the time. Now, as a freelancer, the type of story you do is also very different from when you're working in a news organisation. So you'll know newspapers in particular, TV news, rely on press releases and things which come from the news press associations for science, which are essentially Alpha Galileo and places like that. You can't use that because obviously the editors that you're contacting already have all that information. You're not sending them anything new. You really have to ditch the press releases and go offbeat. So the way I do that is I go regularly to conferences within the areas that I cover. I visit, I organise days with PR people at universities to meet researchers who haven't published something yet but may be working on something interesting in order to get that story first. On a practical note, I would definitely join the NUJ. One, it gives you lots of professional advice. They have courses at prices which are reduced for members, so you can keep up to date with your skills. And also, if you're a freelance member, they have a newsletter that comes with their regular magazine, which gives you advice on pay, legal issues, anything relevant to freelancers, which is really useful. And also, if you have problems, then you can call them and they can give you legal advice or any other kind of career advice you need. As a freelancer, obviously it's particularly important that you are professional because they can ditch you much more easily than they can ditch a staff member. So be extra polite, extra nice to people, always be on deadline, be professional, of course, deliver your work to the highest standard that you can. Don't be sloppy about it. And if they're not paying you very much, then don't do it. If you think your work is not up to the standard that they want, given the money that they're giving you, then just don't do it, because you don't want... the quality of your work is all you have to sell yourself. So just make sure you only take work that you know that you can produce of the highest quality for the money that you're getting. If you have a day job and you're thinking of freelancing on the side, then I would please urge you not to work for free, even though you can afford to work for free, because you undercut everybody else. So for me and everybody else on this panel, freelancing is not a hobby, it's our life. It's our life. I pay the bills, I pay for my family through my job. My job is a freelance science journalist. So when you work for free, you're saying to other editors, you don't need to pay other people because I will do the work for nothing. And of course they will jump at that. But you're doing damage to the profession. The last thing I wanted to say was when you're a staff worker somewhere, you have a career direction. So at the BBC, for instance, I knew that if I stayed there, I'd become a reporter, become a senior reporter, move on to a bigger department, maybe work in documentaries, or move higher up the ladder. As a freelance, obviously, that career ladder is less clear. But what you can do is create a career ladder for yourself, which is to say, like I said before, you're moving from niche publications to mainstream publications, public outlets that pay more. But beyond that, there's also so many different things you can do. So for me, I wrote my book in 2011. That was a big source of income for me. It really raised my profile, and it made me a commentator on science issues, which has also brought in speaking engagement. So that's there are 2 sources of revenue there, and 2 sources of moving yourself up the career ladder. There are also fellowships. So last summer, I just came back from MIT for a year where I'd done a journalism fellowship. These are paid, and they're great ways of moving your career forward because you get to meet researchers, spend time with researchers. They give you training and new techniques. You can get the benefit of spending time with other journalists in a similar position to you. So just your career is a long time. So I'm looking at 30, 40 years ahead of me. I don't want to be just writing articles for magazines for 30, 40 years. I can't, that's not a career direction. For me, a career direction is having some bigger goals and bigger ambition at the end of it, and have something to say. The reason I went into journalism was I was an idealist. I worked for a left-wing publication at university. I worked for a left-wing magazine when I left university, and I feel that if I don't leave this world having it being slightly better than when I came into it, then I haven't achieved my goal as a journalist, and there's no point me doing this because I could have taken my engineering degree and become an engineer. So think about what you want from your life, and how does your career as a freelancer help you achieve that goal. That's it.
Thank you all very much. I think when I was thinking about this session, I was thinking we'd maybe find out a bit about how people get started in this line of work, so how they keep going in it, more importantly, what the horrible bear traps there are to avoid, a bit about how to deal with the impossible people who control budgets, and maybe even how to have some fun while you're doing all this. I was once at a leaving party, not my own, at a well-known weekly magazine, and the editor just said to the person who was leaving that sort of true courage is becoming a freelance when you haven't got to, and the theory that virtually 100% of people who become freelance journalists do it when the previous gig they had went south. And that's not completely true, as we've heard. It is a positive and definite step you can take in your own interest. Let's have some questions and discussion, which I'm sure there's plenty of, given the liveliness of what we've just heard. Richard.
Thank you. Yeah, a couple of comments, really, as somebody who's been both freelancer and, at the moment, fully employed. One thing about having fun. When you're a freelancer and you've been used to working with other people in an organisation, you can get a bit isolated. So it's worth getting together with other people who are in the same sort of position as you. We happen to have set up a network in Oxford which meets monthly to drink and complain about editors and such like. So I think, think almost in a professional way about how you're going to create some space. The other union that you could consider, and I'd strongly advise joining a union, is BEC2. If, like me, you do quite a lot of video work, they sort of fit slightly better in terms of their advice. And they do a very cheap insurance policy. So if somebody trips over my tripod when I'm out in the street and breaks their leg, I'm covered.
Oh, how often does this happen? Anybody? Or shall we take another question? Sir, could you just wait for the microphone to arrive? Thanks. Please, yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for the wonderful points. And actually, I have 3 questions, so I thought I would wait until you answer the other friend.
You're completely welcome. Carry on.
Okay. So the first is about, I'm a freelancer from working from home in Germany. So my challenge is to find bigger outlets. Of course, like everyone else, I also aim at bigger outlets. And for me, I'm quite confused whether I should be a generalist or a specialist in choosing topics. I have a PhD from interdisciplinary nanoscience, and basically I'm a biologist. So I can handle a range of topics from chemistry to bio-nanotechnology and health sciences. And is it good enough to be a generalist as a freelancer, or should I really be a specialist? Because I hated specialism during my PhD. That's why I came into science journalism.
Shall we take that one first? I think you feel strongly about that, Angela.
Yeah, I think it will be of benefit to you to focus on your specialism, just because you know it so well. Then it will be easier for you to find the stories, new stories, and for editors to want you to write them, because nobody else will be coming up with them. But if you really hate it that much, then don't. maybe pick something adjacent to what you're interested in. Maybe just focus on biology, which is quite broad in itself, but it's still something that you know a lot about. For example, I have a degree in engineering. I do a lot of engineering stories, but occasionally I will do a health story or a medical story, which is not my area of expertise, and it takes a lot more work on my part. But there's no reason why you can't do that. But it'll be tougher for you, because then the pool of people you're competing with is much bigger.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you. And my second question is, I'm in my second year in my career, just the beginning of my second year, and I find it difficult to find a balance between free or among free, less paid, and okay paid outlets. So, very honest question. So, how many years or how many months ahead should I, keep doing free or less paid works? Because I need to pull up my portfolio.
I think that's a very difficult question. Let's see, Andrew, you've already mentioned it. Do you have a view on this?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think, so when I started as a journalist, I was actually an editor, a manuscript editor at the Lancet, and they had a news section, and there were book reviews and various things. And effectively, I did do those things for free, because I was editing very technical manuscripts during the day. And then at the weekends, I'd be writing for the same journal, but for every section who would have me. And I just wanted to get writing experience. But after a while, I mean, if you've picked something that you're good at, and you've roughly got an area that you're good at and that you can write well in, you shouldn't need to be writing for free for very long, because you should then be able to hone your pitches for genuine paid slots. So, I would, as Angela said earlier, try and minimise the sort of stuff you give away, because it doesn't turn into a viable career. But also, it's a very different thing when I think you think differently when you're writing a blog for free, for example. You approach it differently to if you're being paid for something, because you're being then valued, and then that gives you more. It brings into a whole different era, sort of area of negotiation where you've agreed on something. It is a business transaction. It's not just something you're handing over. I mean, and I think the idea of doing things for free only works in an ideas industry. I mean, if you sold furniture, you would not expect someone to come in and say, "Can I take this chair for free?" It would be ludicrous. And so I think I'd try and hone your pitches as much as possible, target the publications that maybe are best suited to your work. And if you don't get a paid story straight away, commission straight away, don't try and slide back necessarily to free work, because that can be easier because people are less discerning because it's free, and that ends up being a cycle. Just try and figure out how you get more paid work, is what I would say. It's not always easy, I know. I fully appreciate it's not easy, but that's the only way you can actually turn it into a career, really.
Richard, do you have an opinion on this?
I would agree totally with all that. It's a really difficult rut to get out of once you start pursuing that, and spending much longer on one paid piece of work could be far more valuable to you than any amount of free. Just on the point at the back there about social isolation, I guess, and mixing with other people. I think it's a really, really good point about sort of getting together with colleagues in the area. Funny enough, I've been looking so far unsuccessfully about a group in my area of freelancers in other industries. Because I think it'd be really interesting to see what sort of people, probably half my age, frankly, are doing in sort of tech industries and so forth, and how they're approaching growing their business and generating ideas and collaborating and so forth.
Did you have a third point?
Yes, I have a third
Thank
question.
you.
So I think, Angela, you mentioned that you often organize meetings with PRs. So how easy or how difficult is it?
It's quite easy because public relations people are always desperate for more coverage. So if you contact them and say, I'm interested in speaking to someone, it doesn't take very much out of their day for them to organise a meeting with a scientist for you or a researcher whose work you're interested in, and it can be very fruitful. I've never organised a day like that and it not produce a story, so it is worth doing. And on the working for free, again, I would just say you don't need a lot of clippings. You only need 1 or 2 pieces of work to show somebody. So once that's done, just stop. Okay. And invest that time instead in chasing after the paid commission, even if it takes a while.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Over to that.
Right. Fine, please. Okay. And we'll come to you two after that.
Hello.
Thank you.
Is it live?
Please.
Yeah. Could I say that I've been in journalism for more than 60 years. I'm absolutely appalled that we are discussing trained people working for nothing. I think it's frightful. When I was young, you never did anything like this. You might not be paid very well. Yes, you wrote for your school magazine for nothing and for your university paper perhaps, but you don't write for nothing. And I think it's terrible that we're thinking about this these days. It's a reflection of the life and times. I might say that I now occasionally do things for nothing because I'm old enough to be able to afford it. I do it for charities occasionally, things like that. But I don't think we should be encouraging highly trained individuals to write for nothing. It's really awful.
That's the first thing I've heard today that everyone in the room can probably agree with. Thank you very much.
Hi, I had a question about pitching. How much time and effort do you put into something before you approach an outlet? And also, do you ever get people approaching you for work?
I fancy that. The answer to the second question is yes, but depressingly rare. And I think other people would probably agree with me about that.
In terms of how much time you spend pitching, I think I think pitching is a skill, and you do develop it and you really hone it as you go on and as you get to know publications. Honing your pitch is obviously really important. I think there was a session earlier on, the Dragon's Den one, which talked a lot about that, and it's a difficult one because you need to have enough in your pitch that you convince an editor. Once someone has known you for years, it's a different thing because people I've worked with sometimes for 10 or 12 years, I could send them 2 sentences and they know my work, they know how I approach something, and we know each other very well and they know exactly how I would do something. With someone I don't know as well, I would always put in the time. You don't want to actually write the story in your pitch and actually do all that research, because if you're a freelancer, the other thing that you always have to bear in mind is that your time is money. So it's sort of a bit of a balance. I mean, it depends also if you're pitching for a short news story compared with a feature, or compared with, say, a big project. The bigger the animal, the more time you do have to put into it, but never so much that you're then starting to lose money as you're crafting this beautiful pitch, because it could be a beautiful pitch and then it might just not have the right home, or you might never be able to really sell it. I mean, it's unlikely if it's a really good story. What was the second question again? Do people approach you? They do now, because I've been doing this for quite a long time, and I would probably say personally my split is maybe 50-50, where I pitch stories or projects or ideas half the time, and editors I've worked with for a long time approach me, or if you've been a freelancer and you're doing reasonably well at it, through word of mouth, people get to know what you do, whether you write reports or whether you're particularly good at certain types of investigative journalism, say, and they might approach you as well. That takes a while. I think that's, unless you are an exceptional individual, it's unlikely that when you start freelancing, people will want to commission you because the sort of power dynamic is very much weighted in their favour. But it does happen after a while, yeah, it does.
Richard?
On the pitching, I mean, in some ways you approach it like you'd approach writing a news story, actually. So ensure that the headline and subject line is going to guarantee that it's going to grab their attention and it's exciting, that you get the meat of the thing at the top of the pitch, and then the secondary information further down, but just make sure you've absolutely grabbed their attention with the opening it in the first couple of sentences. If you're pitching for something which perhaps you've been invited to tender for a bigger piece of work, then that's probably going to be a much more extensive operation where you might well be asked to provide evidence of your knowledge and skill base and examples of previous work, even references and so forth I've done. So, I would go in, if that implies a substantial time and fee at the end of it, it's worth doing that with, frankly, the same sort of rigour you do with a job application, because you're actually pitching for a substantial amount of work. So make sure it's all evidence-based, which is the thing people often forget in their CVs, and that you tease out your specialist knowledge, again back to specialism, about why you are uniquely qualified to do that piece of work.
Yep, I would agree. At the point that I'm at now, I've been freelancing for a long time, nearly 6 years. I'd say 70% of my work is people approaching me. But like Priya says, it takes a while to build up to that point where editors rely on you. So the ones who send me work are ones I do work for very regularly. So they know that I'm free and they send me something to do.
I think if you're known as the person who knows about something, in my own case, this is going to sound totally bizarre, solar eclipses, people will actually email me and ask me to write about them, but not. This is a bit rare. And now that way, you've been very patient, thank you.
Thanks, and I guess if you've got a lot of regular work, then this might not count as a question or work. But I was just wondering, when you are working across various different things, how do you keep track to an extent to know that you are going to be able to pay the bills at the end of the month? Do you have a sort of target number that you try to be working on at any given point? Or are you just always there with a calculator working out what you've got coming in when? How do you know it's going to be okay?
Well, for me, I have a target amount that I need to earn every month to know that I'm paying the bills. So as long as I plan ahead and know that the commissions that I've got will cover that, then I'm okay. Obviously, as a freelancer, you don't have a pension automatically, you don't have sick leave, and you don't have maternity pay. So I have built a bank of savings, a quite substantial bank of savings, in order to cover all of that, have a private pension, and always pay your national insurance contributions, because you'll need that at the end. And I stupidly did not know this. Even I have an accountant who does all my taxes, so I don't think about tax stuff very often. But when I had my baby last year, because I'd paid national insurance contributions, the government gives you quite a sizable amount every week in statutory maternity pay if you pay them. And I know other freelancers have got caught out because they thought they didn't need to pay national insurance. So that's the best safety net that you have.
Yes, I agree. Anybody else?
Yeah, sorry, no, Richard.
I was going to say, in my early months, I was running quite lean, basically, to build up some reserves, and that it was a very good way of doing that. So since then, it hasn't been a problem. I can sort of absorb the fluctuations. What I found far more difficult than managing the money is managing my time, actually. And I've got various sort of systems in place which sort of wax and wane with their effectiveness, but it is actually managing one's own time, and particularly if you're working from home, just managing your sort of mental space in terms of downtime and relaxation against actually that sort of temptation always just to go back and check an RSS feed or whatever. So there's quite a lot of discipline and systems to make the actual work more enjoyable.
There was a speaker at the last session, Toby, who told us all about his dedication to his vegetable growing and tomato watering, and he's got the work-life balance down to a very fine art, because he's been doing this for quite a long time. I'd just say in my own case, and I'm sure it's true of other people, that just having one or two organisations that I'm pretty sure are going to pay me some money every month is very helpful. Here, yeah.
Hello, good evening. My name is Silvia and I'm Italian.
Well.
Yeah. I'm a freelance science writer, and as Angela, I worked for the radio, for the TV, for the biggest newspapers in my country, which is now Repubblica, and I'm working with Scientific American Italian edition, and I'm working for everyone who pays me, or at least I used to work for everyone who paid me. In this moment, in my country at least, I don't know if in England it's much different, but it's really, really very hard to work as a freelance. And so every time I go out and I have to talk with other people about freelancing, I say the same thing you said. No, never work for free, make you being paid every month. But in this moment, I think the last 2 years, at least, things are really terrible. And I have the impression that every time we talk about this subject, we forget that stuff changes. In the last 10 years, I've seen changing stuff on the market, stuff on the technology, stuff on the internationality of my country, stuff on the economic, stuff on the educations, not just on politics, luckily in my case. But what I want to say is that, do you see the end of this story? Because in this moment, I think that the end is no more freelancing, at least for me.
Oh, that was unusually pessimistic. Anybody want to reassure our colleague from Italy?
I think that a situation is exactly the opposite in the UK.
Yeah.
At least that's what I find. As people are being laid off, editors are more desperate for freelancers to fill the gap. So over the last few years, I've found that there is more work available here. And I appreciate that in Italy the situation might be quite different, that maybe publications are closing down, their budgets are shrinking, so perhaps the opposite is happening. One option could be to write in other countries. So I write for American publications all the time. So that could, if your written English is up to that grade, then that's an option. But, otherwise, change of career time. I just don't know what else can you do?
I think maybe that's, you were saying, the diversification, as Richard was talking about, I think that is really important to have your fingers in lots of different pies, because you never know. Sometimes, a particular editor who's been giving you lots of work at a magazine may leave, and then the new person you may not gel with, or maybe they want to take things in a different direction. And so you do need to have a portfolio of interests, as you would if you were thinking of, say, investing money. You need to be prepared that some things are going to change. A magazine may totally fold, and if you're dependent on that completely for your rent or your mortgage, then you're going to be quite stuffed. So not just diversifying clients, but also diversifying skills. So if you can work across, radio and film and all these different things, then you just have a much bigger pool of places where you can go to get work. And it's, sometimes you do need to reinvent yourself slightly. I mean, over my career, I started out writing fairly daily news and quite broad, I'd say, medical news and very laboratory-based clinical stuff, and then I moved into policy because that's what I really loved. And so you do, as a journalist, reinvent yourself slightly, and again, every time you reinvent yourself, you get more clients, different types of work, and so it is about being adaptable. And I'd say, I think I would probably agree with Angela that in the UK, where numbers of staff either are shrinking or definitely not expanding. I mean, you very rarely hear of new magazines or, people hiring 2 or 3 new members of staff. If you're a freelancer and if you can figure out where to pitch things and where your niche is, you do have a shot, but you just need to diversify really as much as you can.
I think I'd agree. I'm just conscious that the plenary session is supposed to be at 4:00, and I can see, well, at least one of the top table speakers at the back of the room. Let's take 1 or 2 more, but we might have to finish up pretty quickly. Can I see if someone who has already spoken wants to say something?
So when it comes to the money side of things, do you normally set how much you're going to charge for something, or does the publication do that? And if it's you, how do you go about working out how much you're worth?
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting question, I think. I mean, if you're writing, it's easiest when you're writing for magazines and journals. News and features tend to have a rate. They probably have a variable rate. So, an entry-level journalist that they've never worked with before might be on a particular sort of band, and they might have a couple of different rates that you can then, with seniority and with expertise and specialty, kind of move up a little bit. So in terms of being paid per word or, per piece, there's not as much wiggle room. There can be, but it really depends on how good you are at negotiating. When you're working, say, as a consultant, as I do sometimes, and as Richard does, and Angela probably does as well, it's hard. It's almost, because asking a freelancer what their rate is, people sometimes don't think that what you're actually asking them is what their salary is, which you wouldn't really, well, not in England anyway, you probably wouldn't ask them, what a permanent person got paid. And so there are various things. I think the NUJ actually has a list of sort of average freelancer rates or typical freelancer rates. It really can vary. It's almost sometimes as much as you are prepared or have the guts to ask for. And you can, I would just say, a lot of judicious Googling to just search around, hunt around. As Richard was saying, if it's a really big client, they have money. And the more money they have, the more money you ask, and you sort of, it's sort of like playing poker, whether you don't want to ask something so outlandish that they think you're just doing it for the money. So that, unfortunately, time is the only thing that can teach you how much to ask. But there is a lot more information on, I think, websites like Glassdoor.com, I think. If I remember, they've got rates on there, and
and NUJ have rates for the job as well.
Yeah.
Okay, my only thing on that would be,
very briefly.
Is that there's nothing more frustrating than when you pitch where you think high and they say yes, that's fine, and you've underpitched. It's a worse feeling.
On that tragic note. Okay, we are now fresh out of minutes here, so could we thank these three excellent speakers for this very informative session, and thank you for your attention.